Hey, Phil, thank you for coming in. I really enjoyed my time with this conference called Rising Stars. Incredible event. You were one of the major organizers behind it. Just love the experience working with you. And then in talking with you, I find that you've got this really wonderful, amazing background of accomplishment over decades and decades. You name it, you've done it. So I'm really appreciative you taking the time to do this chat with me today.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
So Phil, one of the questions I'm always really curious about with people is that, I've got this amazing person. His name is Phil, and he's done so much across so many different communities. What were the kind of the catalysts to make you who you are? So maybe you could talk about two or three inflection points in your life, kind of like milestones that created Phil.
Well, so I've always liked technology. I mean, back in the day when I got my first walkie-talkie, I would take the back off of it and pretend like I was fixing it. So I've always liked technology, and probably one of my first milestones and challenges that I felt really helped define me was as an engineering student. We had a 9-week course. It was called your engineering lab, and you had to come up with an idea that had never been presented before. So I was the only diver, and by the way, a brand new licensed certified diver on my team of several people. And I pitched the idea to the team because no one else had an idea. And in 9 weeks, we brought forth the world's first microprocessor controlled scuba diving computer that had all of the US Navy dive tables embedded in it, had a 1 hertz clock, used an 8-bit microprocessor. Now, it was my idea, but it morphed over just what my initial idea was. And the interesting part about this, Stephen, is I didn't wrap one wire. I didn't write one line of code, but I helped with the fundraising. I helped with the ideas. I essentially, if you want to call it as a student, managed the team, right? Using Gantt charts and that type of a thing. And it was almost kind of DevOps before there was DevOps, right? Because you had a team of people trying to accomplish a common goal, and you had to make changes as you went along on the fly. Initially, the scuba diving computer was going to be something in my mind that you would enter above water, type in how deep you're going to go, how long you're going to stay there, and it would spit these things out. You would write them down and take them with you. That morphed into, hey, why don't we, someone on the team said, why don't we just have it automate and let you know these things? So I'm thinking, well, that's great. And so in 9 weeks, we came up with this, and it actually took first place at an engineering contest. And so that's kind of, I see that pattern happening over and over in a lot of the activities I feel most satisfied about, whether I'm writing a line of code or creating a piece of hardware for something. But that's really what I think defines me. And I appreciate you asking.
So that's really interesting, that being an inflection point in your life and then being replicated through the rest of your career. I'm just going to drill a little bit backward in time then. I mean, did you have some kind of mentor or, within your family, outside your family, that really got you interested in tinkering with things and taking them apart, or interest in science or engineering or you mentioned hardware. I mean, where did all of that come from?
I think I've always been fascinated with things like, Lost in Space, when they had these gadgets that you could had a little cooler looking thing. You could take something and stick it in, it would replicate it, right? Those types of things, and travel and technology. But I've had a mentor for the past 40 years who has always challenged me. And it's not always been about technology necessarily. I think I do best, Stephen, when I'm challenged with a situation and I don't have all of the answers. And I think that's critical, because a lot of people today think they need to have every answer, know every line of code, know where every circuit goes and every wire is connected and all these things. One of the challenges after I graduated, this mentor invited me at my request to give back. And he was involved in the Special Olympics. And he said, why don't you come to the meeting that we're going to have? It's a state level local Special Olympics competition meeting we're going to have, and come and see what you can do. I actually took advantage of a lack of competition in the equestrian level. Okay, my name Philip means lover of horses in Greek. I'd never had a horse, but they needed a state level competition. There were all these regional levels of competition, so I volunteered to do that. Stephen, I had never been to a rodeo. I barely knew how to ride a horse, but I took some time and did some research and formed a team of people that had done rodeos, had done horses. There's a program called Horses Help in Phoenix that takes disabled people and puts them on a horse. Now, you and I have probably ridden horses, right? And you know there's certain cues that you have to give to get the response from the horse. These people aren't able to do that. They don't have the physical capacity, but the spiritual connection of these people and the horse's ability to receive and understand that was amazing. Because I'm thinking, here you're putting this person, you're lifting a person out of a wheelchair, putting them on a 1,200-pound animal that can crush them, you know, or do anything. And yet the horse and the rider formed this bond. And we brought that level of competition to the state in Arizona, which they'd never done before. That was not a technical challenge, but it was more of an organizational challenge. And I find that I do that and I enjoy doing that over and over. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, you know, you see this thread throughout your life as sort of, you see the technical elements, the hardware elements, the software elements, but you also see this people connection that you have in every case and really helping, giving back in some way. It's just so notable. Again, I'm gonna drill a little bit into your background. Like you worked on multi-ship simulators. You wrote code for directional interfaces for F-16 triaxial data bus to a PC. I mean, that sounds like pretty amazing work. I guess you can't talk about it because it's probably like classified, right?
Oh, no, I'm happy to talk about it. Matter of fact, neither one are classified, by the way. But thank you. So I'll pick the multi-ship thing first. I worked for McDonnell Douglas Helicopter Company, which is now Boeing, I think. But they had from a competitive standpoint, they were having a fly-off with Boeing. And the competition was to create the world's first fly-by-wire, retina-controlled, optical cockpit, basically, right? With multifunction displays that would track your eyes. We had a device that would track your eye movement, and you could actually use that to control the aircraft. Since McDonnell Douglas made the AH-64 Apache helicopter, we had a flight control which was a hex redundant 1800 hertz flight control unit. And they gave me one of those. They said, make this talk to the computer, a big pipeline computer. So I built a box that took that fed the flight controller and took the data and sent that back to the computer so we could have actual flight input from the pilots to control the simulator. So I did that. And then back in the day, this was late 80s, like 1990, and Deming and Duran, the whole MBO, management by objectives, was very popular. So my boss said to me, your MBO is solve this sub-microsecond delay that we have, because it's noticeable to the human eye. When one person's in one ship and one person's in the other ship and they look, they don't quite see things in real time, and they need to, which is true. Again, I'd never written a line of code. I didn't build the simulator, but you know, I call it stone soup, right? So this is back when you would send a memo out and the secretary put it on everybody's box, right? So we had a meeting, this big long room, and it was interesting, Stephen. All of the software guys sat on one side of the table. All the hardware guys sat on the other side of the table. And I stated the problem, and I use words like our objective. What are we going to do? How can we solve this problem, right? Not your hardware is wrong or your software needs to be, you know, revised. And so we just had a discussion. It was a discussion that similar to a lot of the discussions that you would have with the team, right? And I asked the question, well, we didn't have this before. What software changes would have caused this? And the software guy said, well, I just commented some code out, but I can take a look at it. And the hardware guy said, well, yeah, I had to replace something with a similar piece of equipment. It shouldn't have any problem. And we were able to resolve that. And again, I never wrote a line of code. I never changed any of the hardware, but I led the team to accomplish that goal, which I thought it was something that I didn't know that I could actually do. So that was fun. Then the F-16 thing, this is I think one of my, again, shining moments where I'm challenged with something that I know a little bit about, but not a lot. I was hired by General Dynamics, who at the time, it was early 90s, they were not allowed to interview the candidates because of some government restriction. They were only allowed to take a look at your resume. They picked my resume out of a pile because I'd done flight simulation. And I got to Fort Worth, Texas, and the engineering manager said, I need two people. I need a drafts person and I need a C code writer. Drafts person's not a big deal. It's dot to dot basically with a light pen. So I interviewed with them, interviewed with a programming guy. And I told the guy, I said, I'm not the world's best programmer, but I've written, hello world, haha. And he said, great, no problem. Went back to the engineering manager and he said, great, you're writing the interface between the F-16 flight bus and the Japanese simulator that we had, because I think the Japanese military at the time was had contracted General Dynamics for a flight simulator, but they couldn't build a full-fledged flight simulator. What they wanted was a 640 by 480 display that had the buttons around the outside displayed as letters on the keyboard to simulate the bezel of an F-16 multifunction display. It would feed this triaxial bus from the airplane to this computer that I was working in. Now, Stephen, I'm seriously, I had only written Hello World, okay? I was just stunned. So I went to Barnes and Noble, the bookstore, and I looked on the bookshelf and I saw this one book that said, Learn C Now, right? And it had 3 5.25-inch floppy disks. It wouldn't generate any executable code, but it had exercises. You could go through the printf, the scanf, the array functions. And so I learned those functions at night. And in the daytime, I went to the meetings and worked on the specification, because they hadn't yet received their copy of Microsoft C++ yet. It was on order, but as things go, they didn't have it yet. So by the time we received the software that I could compile the code, I had written all of the scanf, printf functions and the display functions, and taken the triaxial bus to interpret that, put it on a 640 by 480 screen, and each of the letters on the keyboard corresponded to something on the screen, and you could type the keyboard just like you were typing on the multifunction display and interact with an F-16. Again, it was new to me and it was challenging, but that's what I did on the F-16 thing and the Apache helicopter simulator.
What you're telling me then is people should embrace stretch goals. In other words, if you're presented with a problem and you don't know how to do it, then figure it out if you can, and research it and bring people in who can iterate towards that goal. Like, I taught computing for many years, and there's this concept called stepwise refinement. In other words, you get this huge problem and you go, what do I do? Well, break it into the little parts and solve the little parts, and ultimately you'll solve the big problem. And what I'm hearing from you, though, is you're never afraid to tackle something, and that this is working at your boundaries and keep stretching your boundaries and keep accepting those kind of challenges. Now, I know you did some work at NASA as well. So tell me about that, because I bet you it's going to be the story of boundaries, stretching them, stretch goals, and then achieving more.
Thank you, Stephen. In fact, it is. So as part of some of the work that I do, there's a tool, a network discovery tool that I implemented at Los Alamos National Laboratories. And I implemented it in a beta program, which turned out that it was a great tool, but no one was going to let this particular computing department scan all their networks. And so it basically went nowhere, but I demonstrated from a prototype perspective that we could put the tool, stand the tool up. I'd never done that before. So leveraging that on my resume, I got a call from NASA to go and solve a problem that they had. Now, this particular manufacturer of software had this discovery tool. NASA had put it in. The manufacturer had come out to try to help solve some of the problems. They could not. They had one of their partners come out. The partner couldn't solve the problem. And they called me. And I said, I'm happy to come out, see what I can do. And they said, great. And then they had given me 3 weeks worth of time and money to solve this problem. There were assets that were coming in as duplicates. There were ones that were deleted that weren't being deleted from their configuration management database, or CMDB, and they couldn't figure it out. So I flew out to Alabama at Marshall Space Flight Center, and I said, I'm here. Where do I sign in? Where do I, access your computer? And they said, oh no, that's going to take too long. We've only got 3 weeks to get you a badge and a computer and a background check. That would take too long. Just show us what to do. So after I took my breath and stopped rolling my eyes, I said, okay, great. You're the guy that has access. Type this. He said, type this. I said, okay, great. Put it on the screen. I said, okay, print that out. And we took it. And so in 2 weeks' time, rather than the 3 weeks they'd allotted, we had resolved all the issues. And I had never once even logged into I was not allowed to log in or touch any of their keyboards. And, Stephen, I left a week's worth of money on the table. And at consulting rates, that's a considerable amount of money. But my goal was to provide the best for that customer with the least amount of time and within their time frame or ahead of schedule. So about 18 months later, they said, well, can you help us solve another problem? And this was to provide a way to track exemptions from maintenance freeze windows during NASA's missions, whether it's a Mars mission, a moon mission, or a space walk, or whatever the case may be, right? So I went and that's actually my forte, this particular code type writing. So I wrote this, helped this application grow to be able to manage that. And it went much longer. So actually the week's worth of money that I left on the table for NASA, I more than made up from that project. And then I just finished last week another version of that implementation to bring it up to a higher level to encompass the folks in Russia and the folks, at all the NASA sites here, from JPL to Goddard to Johnson to Kennedy and things. And that's kind of what I've was able to do for NASA. Again, I took a leap, got a little bit of a stretch there in my my mental capacity, and I enjoy doing that.
You've got this consulting work you do, and you've done it for Starbucks and Dell and Capital One and Baylor College of Medicine, the State University of New York, the University of Arizona. And of course, you already talked about the Air Force and Navy, the U.S. House of Representatives, and so on. I mean, it's everybody, right? It's interesting. What would that work be like for the U.S. House of Representatives? Is it some kind of communication system they have, or something else that you work on, or?
So I'm happy to talk about that as well. What I did for them, this was not this most recent congressional transition. This was the 116th Congress. And basically, it's like one of those puzzles, the 16 slot puzzles where you've got 15 numbers and you've got to move them around, and get them in the right order from 1 to 15, but you can only move one in one spot, right? So there are 435 representatives in the House of Representatives, and there's 100 committees. And each of these committees and representatives can change, and does change, not only in their position, being elected or not being reelected, as well as where their office is. There are 3 buildings. There's the Cannon Building, the Longworth Building, and there's a third building, I forget, top of my head, I can't remember. But each of these has a congressional office. And there's actually, interestingly enough, in today's age of technology, the offices are selected by drawing a chit from a wooden box, a plastic chit. I think maybe it's a wooden a number from a box. You enter a lottery. So if you're a representative in the House of Representatives, you can, if you choose, enter your name to be selected from this lottery. Now, what that does is that gives you the ability to walk up and pick a number, which is the number that's going to be your place in line to select what your office is. There's one at the time. There was one of the floors of the Cannon Building that the elevator didn't go up. So you didn't want to be on that floor, right? You wanted to have a nice central office by the cafeteria, looking out at the Capitol, so your constituents can come up. It's easy to find, and it's a maze. In the Longworth building, in some of those, the floors look the same, but there are multiple floors, and there's tunnels. So you may get off an elevator, and you may be down at the tunnel level to go over to the Capitol and come back. So that was my role was to automate that process for the incoming representatives and the committee members, so that the ones that were rolling off rolled out, and the ones that were moving in moved in, and the offices changed. So that was it had a time frame to be completed when Congress became active for the next session of the 116th Congress. And that was, again, interesting project, never done it before, but I accepted the challenge, and I enjoyed it.
You know, you've been and you do work with production teams with movies, like, for example, you were brought in with Top Gun and other feature films. Is it the same kind of thing then? They have some kind of technical issue that they want coordination on. They bring you in because you're a known entity, you got a great track record, and they say, Phil, solve this issue. And then now you come in and you solve it.
Well, thank you, Stephen. So the film crew that brought us Top Gun were the same people that did a couple of other films. One of them, the first time I met them, was on a film that the working title, and films typically have a working title and then a release title. The working title was called The Wings of the Apache, which they later changed to Firebirds. But they had a situation that I tend to I'm a little nosy, Stephen, right? So I was there at McDonnell Douglas, and they had come to take some footage of the Apache helicopter and some of the simulators and things, and some of the gun firing. And I had overheard the fact that they were having a challenge. They had mounted a camera on a strut to take some footage of the 30mm cannon firing in the air. So they would frame it on the ground, take off, fly around, shoot, come back. And at the time, films, they had what they called dailies, right? So you would take the film, send it off, FedEx it off, they would develop it, come back, and the next day you would look at it. And every day they come back and they would see this blank frame where they had framed the gun. So I explained the fact that, you've at rest on the ground, you've got what's called weight on wheels. And that is a different frame than the frame that you see when you're flying around. So I found somebody on the other side of the campus, or the facility there, where they actually test a 30mm gun in a static tunnel, basically, right? So they were thrilled that I was able to help them get that footage. And then they said, well, we've got to take some other footage here of the simulator. Can you help us? So all I basically did was sit there with a Betacam recorder and stop and start that, as far as helping them with that and some of the logistics, getting things in and out. I'm fairly social. I knew all the security guys, and they were like, yeah, they're like, oh, it's Phil, go ahead and bring it in. I'm the guy, by the way, that you want testing your security, because I will be friendly with the security guys and I'll get things in that maybe shouldn't get through. But anyway, it was, and so Bill Bottolato, who was the executive producer of, as far back as the Jaws films, the Top Gun, as you mentioned, this film, Firebirds. And then I also worked on another film with them, with Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. I got to meet Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. I got to meet Lloyd Bridges before he passed away, and a great crew of folks. And they basically spoofed the Top Gun movie that they'd made, called Hot Shots, right? And so after that, Bill said to me, he goes, man, I like your style. I like your drive. I like the fact that you're, on the spot and you think on your feet. He goes, I tell you what, you come to Hollywood, I'll put you to work. I'll put you in business. And I thought about it, and things would be different if I had, but I didn't. So, that was a great opportunity. And by the way, at McDonnell Douglas, which, by the way, I love helicopters. I've flown a couple of them. I don't have my pilot's license, but I've flown a couple of helicopters. And I actually got an opportunity from the chief flight test officer at McDonnell Douglas, who was a reservist. And he said, look, this never happens. He goes, but I have a flight school billet in my reserve wing to fly Apaches. If you want it, it's yours. You go there, you go through the flight school, you're a pilot on my team. And I thought about it, Stephen, and again, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. Things would be different if I had taken that, but I didn't. So anyway, I've just had a number of different, I'll call them mini careers. And this just, that just gets me going, and it's exciting for me. And I always look forward to my next challenge.
So, but you had this sort of opportunity with the space shuttle too, somehow, right? To kind of do a little bit of driving of it, sort of.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so that's the beauty of being in flight simulation. My first job out of school was working on the B-52 flight simulation station, which has a nav and RNAV station, and then a flight station, and then a gunnery and an electronic warfare officer station. So my job with SingerLink was to take these simulators and go and install them at different military locations, installations, and get the training up for that. So that was fun. I had a good time with that. But then I've also had a chance, as you would if you're in another same industry, to look at different types of simulators. So that got me a job at NASA and Johnson Space Center, where we were doing an upgrade to the visual system for the shuttle mission simulator, or SMS. So as part of that, in order to, from a metrics perspective, be able to verify that the upgrade worked and actually had an impact, we had to learn how to fly the simulator for the space shuttle. Now, most full motion-based simulators have pitch, roll, yaw, and heave. It's called a six DOF, or 6 degree of freedom motion-based simulator, you know, because it's got two directions, but three vectors. The shuttle simulators actually has a 7th degree of motion because in order for launch, you're on your back, right? So I was able to learn how to fly this space shuttle, and I probably know more than I should about that, but it was a really fun experience to learn how to fly that. And then actually, after we did the upgrade on the visual system, we had to go back and refly it to take some metrics to make sure that the upgrade was a success. So I've had so much fun in all these different areas of my life, learning to fly the space shuttle. By the way, I went up to Miramar when I was in San Diego, and I guess I'm just not good. It's good that I'm not a Top Gun pilot, because I crashed the F-18, 16 simulator out there many times because it didn't have any motion. You know, in our inner ear, you know, there are cues that we get. By the way, when you're in these fixed base or motion based simulators, and you turn, and then you turn more and you turn more, what they do is they'll give you a visual impulse, right? And so you're inside your cerebral cortex, you feel this, oh, I'm at this angle. What's actually happening, if you look outside the simulator, is they give you that, but then the simulator actually slowly and imperceptibly moves back to neutral position. So if you give it another impulse, it can do that again, but the visual stays the same. And you think you're upside down because you've had so many kicks to the left. In fact, you're you know, in a neutral position there, so you can give another impulse function. But anyway, so yeah, it's just been a great ride.
You know, another big part of your life is amateur radio. So can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. Again, I told you when I was a kid and I got my first set of little green or olive drab green walkie-talkies, you know, and that ability to talk to somebody that you can't see fascinated me. So then as a high school student, I couldn't afford an amateur radio because they were hundreds of dollars. And I wasn't good at Morse code. So we got a CB radio, which they called 11 meters, CB radio. That was fun, had a fun time building antennas. Fast forward to my time at Los Alamos National Laboratories, when I had some time on my hands and I took the amateur radio test, got my technician's license. Then in Washington, DC, there was an amateur radio club that I was affiliated with and joined, and was able to get my general and my extra class license, which is the highest license available for operators, amateur radio operators here in the US. I think our extra class is the same as your initial class in Canada. There's a Canadian counterpart of mine that has his license. He says ours is harder. Ours is like your extra class. So I was able to get that. And again, in the effort to give back, which I have found, Stephen, that by giving, you get. And it's almost this process, you want to give more so you can get more, right? But if you give without looking to get, it just has this effect of wanting you to give more. So fast forward to when I've got my license and I'm in Washington, D.C., they do a triennial, what's called an airport exercise, an APEX, where they simulate a failure. They basically take one part of the runway at Reagan Airport, Washington National Airport, and they take I think it was JetBlue, donated an airframe, and they bring the airframe out, and they bring a lot of the Citizens Emergency Response Team or CERT teams as actors, and they set this airframe on fire at the end of the runway, and they dispatch EMS and fire and the first responders to go put that out, and they take simulated patients that have got what they call moulage. It's kind of like makeup, right? And the first responders put that out, and then the EMS folks go in and they assess each of the patients and they dispatch those to the hospitals. And then there's a series of radio operators in the different hospitals that are networked together via radio. And we receive patients that come from the airport that have been diagnosed, transported, and we receive them at the emergency room, and then we track them all the way through discharge, and we relay that information from the emergency room back up to the control room at the hospital, which is relayed back to the network operating center at the airport. And so that was my first experience in that type of emergency response or simulated response. But fast forward to today, I am an officer in the amateur radio emergency services for the county where I live, Travis County. And my assignment is, my current assignment, if requested, is that we have a combined transportation and emergency communications center, or CTEC, here in Austin. It's a hardened facility. It's got water, power. It's a multi-agency facility with the sheriff and police and fire and transportation and communications. We have a radio room there. So when dispatched, we go there and we actually send emails over the radio without the internet. So in the event that infrastructure goes down, power goes down, there's no cell phones, there's no internet, we can still pass traffic. And we can encrypt it, where you're supposed to basically use non-encrypted means for amateur radio. But that's my current assignment. I also provide, and this is interesting, I asked at one of our officers' meetings, I said, every other net, which is basically an online serial conference call, if you will, right, using radio. It's what they call a controlled net. You've got a controlled operator that asks each station to check in, and it's, the conversations are controlled by the net control operator. I said, every other club that I've been to or net that I've joined, they have training. It says, are there any stations with training? And we never have any. And they said, great, you're on it. Your job is to provide training. So every week now I do some research, and whether it's, telling people to make sure their generators are operational and produce an output, or they have power, or their batteries are charged, or they have alternate frequencies programmed in. That's what I do, in addition to providing training from the National Incident Command System that we have here in the US. That's what I do now on a weekly basis. And every Sunday, that's what I do. And, as part of that, I'm prepared. So we just had a heavy winter storm here in Austin. And because of that, because of my training, I was unaffected. I've got power, water, and energy, and basically foodstuffs. And I've got, from a cybersecurity perspective, there's a concept called resiliency, where you never want to be dependent upon one particular single point of failure, whether it's a network provider or a source of fuel or a particular frequency. So I've got multiple radios, multiple frequencies. I've got 2 4-wheel drive trucks. One is hybrid, which means gas and electric, and the other one is a diesel. I have a dual fuel generator, which is propane and gasoline. So, as part of the preparedness, I have to live and breathe that. And it came in handy this past week when everyone else didn't have power, didn't have water, didn't have the ability to communicate.
It's amazing how your background in this training and your interests have just created a tremendous capability that you have, a resilience that you have because of all of this background that you have as well. It's interesting, you did this zombie apocalypse workshop about a year ago too, right? Could you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. Thank you, by the way. You would think that I had this crystal ball or was a fortune teller. In fact, it was simply coincidence, I think. So the zombie apocalypse workshop is one that I put on a year ago, about a year ago, January. In the purpose of the zombie apocalypse workshop was to bring to the forefront the concept of amateur radio, preparedness, and resiliency. So I designed a workshop to introduce the ITU phonetic alphabet, because even in the software world, I'm on conference calls with people from other countries and people with bad coverage, and to try to give license keys or try to give information where they're saying apple, banana, Coca-Cola kind of a thing. It's difficult. So the ITU phonetic alphabet is very helpful for that. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, right? So we introduced them to the ITU phonetic alphabet. Now, when I say introduce them to this, I didn't give them a handout, because Stephen, you know this, we learn by reinforcing things with different methods. So I said to the group, by the way, so there were 80 folks that had registered for the conference, and we tried to limit it to 80 because I had brought radios with me to use in the workshop. We actually had over 105 folks actually attend the workshop, and there were 2 undercover FBI agents that I had no idea were in the audience. So we basically introduced them to the ITU phonetic alphabet. I said, it's on the screen. I said, look up there. Read the ITU phonetic alphabet. You've got a blank piece of paper in front of you. Write it down. So they read it, they wrote it, and then they used it, because we generated a unique identifier for each person in the workshop, broke them up into groups of 10. And then they used this unique identifier to walk around the room. We call an eyeball to eyeball QSO. So you say, hi, Stephen, I'm Phil, and my call sign is Alpha, Alpha 5, Echo X-ray. My favorite color is blue. And Stephen says, oh, hi, Phil, I'm Stephen. My call sign is KG5, UFE, and my favorite color is black. Great, thank you. And they were to move on to the next person around the room. So it was interesting as I mingled amongst these youngsters, I say, because they were under 25, most of them, except for the FBI agents, to hear them use words that they're familiar with, but in a different context. They weren't used to saying Alpha, Alpha 5, Echo X-ray, right? So then I had them sit down, and I said, okay, who got the most? And I, threw little prizes at them. We did that. We also gave them walkie-talkies, because the kids today, they use cell phones and the internet and their smart watches. They don't really use walkie-talkies, if you will. So the radios I brought were handheld transceivers, or we call them HTs. And I broke the room up into groups of 10. And each pair had a walkie-talkie, and they were dispatched to tactical stations for our simulated emergency, a battery station, a water station, a food station, a medical station. And we ran them through this managed net where they checked in and provided information and provided a situation report. I've got 5 bandages. I've got 3 bottles of water. I need, 2 granola bars. I've got 5 batteries, and 2 of them aren't charged, and we're charging 3 of them. So we did that. And then we actually took them out and used repeaters that were programmed into the radios. And we had a special event call sign issued by the FCC at my request to talk to people from all around the world. And we got this one guy in Alaska that kept coming back and says, I want to talk to another person. And so these people who had never, people who had never even used a walkie-talkie, never used the ITU phonetic alphabet, are now, we're in Vegas. These people are talking to this guy in Alaska using this little radio thing, using a language that they've never used before. So we did that. And then I got on HF and we heard some other folks on HF. But the following day, I gave them I gave them a link to say, here's how you can study. I'm not going to give you the answers. So I said, if you study for this test tomorrow, my company will pay for anyone who wants to take the test. If you like this and you want to get your license, come back tomorrow. We'll have a test. You can take it as many times as you want. It's free. So we got, I think, 16 people to pass their license. We had 11 new technicians, 3 new generals, and 2 new extra class radio operators out of that. And again, that's my way of giving back. But here's the premise. And you mentioned zombie apocalypse. To tie all this together, to give some context of why would you even do any of this, I created this this elaborate backstory. Here was the backstory. The backstory was, you're an engineering student. You're a double major. You've picked astrobiology and astrophysics as your two majors, right? And it's winter break. And you're coming up on Christmas time. Your roommate's left the country. He's down in Cabo having beers with his friends, sitting on the beach, and you're left finishing up your thesis. And you've got one more observation you're going to make. And by the way, as part of your internship, you got access to a radio telescope and a spectrometer, right? So you notice in one of your images that there's a near Earth object that's headed towards Earth. And you take an image of that and you run it through analysis, and you realize that it's got a virus on it that we don't have a cure for. Now, your responsibility is to let the CDC, the World Health Organization, and FEMA know that, number one, there is a near Earth object that's headed on a collision course with Earth, and that there's this virus, which you know the DNA sequence from your analysis, that we've got to synthesize an antivirus for before this thing hits us. And here's the twist. The twist is it's got a ferrous core. So it's disrupted the power grid. It's disrupted the internet. It's disrupted cell phone service. There's no standard way of communicating that these kids have used in the past. But their roommate has left all of their radio gear in their dorm room on their side in a big pile, and you never bothered to learn how to use it. Now's your chance. And so that was the big backstory with all this. That was a year ago, just on the cusp of COVID-19. So that's the answer to the zombie apocalypse story and the elaborate backstory that I created. But it was very rewarding, and it had a great time.
You know, just what a wonderful way to simulate potential problems and challenges, right? And so that people are prepared, and you have this resilience, as you indicated, and it speaks to your ability to give and to tie in all of these disparate pieces, these sort of silos in essence, and combine them and associate it in a meaningful way. One thing, you know, early in my life, I was actually part of our militia here in Canada. And I remember learning, you know, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and so on, the radio communications and so on. I didn't realize to today that it comes from ITU, which is the International Telecommunications Union. It's a UN agency responsible for technology standards, and it's about 156 years old. I didn't know that till today.
Absolutely, and it's very useful, absolutely.
The thing is, I actually work with the ITU a lot. You know, I created this or founded this thing called AI for Good. And so I've been, you know, working with and they're the founding host, the UN host of this AI conference and so on. So, but, I mean, it's amazing.
I didn't know you were in the military, Stephen.
So I'll tell my folks back at ITU, I didn't realize that alphabet was theirs. Okay, by the way, Internet of Things, that's actually ITU coined that term, IoT.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, that's them, yeah. Okay, so we really explored your very sort of deep background. Let's just do a time check. Are you still good for another 10, 15 minutes or?
Absolutely. I've got plenty of time for you, Stephen. Thank you.
Okay, so let's sort of look at your viewpoint of how the world is today, and then, you know, some years into the future. You know, what do you think are some of the major technology challenges, perhaps societal challenges today, or opportunities? You can frame it anywhere you want, and then I'll pause, and then I'll ask about the future. So today, you know, what are the things should we be paying attention to?
Well, I think in kind of what COVID has brought us, I think is, you know, we've been on this nonstop roller coaster straight down with all of our sensors and all of our travel and all of our activities, if you will. And COVID has basically brought a halt to a lot of that and said, look, you know, you need to have some they call it social distancing. It's really more of a physical distancing, right? But one of the things that I think that's come out of this is the fact that as a consultant, and even in this conference, this Rising Stars conference that we recently did, where I met you, is that there are a lot of managers that don't have the confidence in their staff, whether you're a consultant, whether you're a full-time employee, to be productive, right? When you're not within eyesight or earshot, you know, if you can't be, as an example, at the House of Representatives, I had to sit right outside the manager's office. And if he needed something, he could wave and I would go in and that kind of thing, right? But then when we're faced with the inability to be co-located or maybe to travel, all of a sudden the things that we've been telling our customers for years, that we can be effective remotely, we're actually, in my opinion, more effective remotely, because when I get up, I'm at work and I work until I go to bed. And I may work through lunch because I'm sitting there at my desk at home, and I'm far more productive. And now, instead of managers saying, I need you to be here on site or there's no position for you, I'm getting managers saying, can you please stay home? And by the way, here's the number of tasks that we have. So that's important. I think our ability to learn and adapt, just as you've brought up, with things like creating a vaccine in record time, getting it out in record time, right? And the chain of custody and handling a vaccine that has to be transported at minus 73 degrees and distributed to a wide, you know, population, the logistics that are involved in that. And I've taken my significant is a healthcare worker. So she was one of the first to receive the Pfizer vaccine. So I took her to get that, and it was a seamless process. And I took her to get her secondary dose. And again, it from the outside, it looks like a very seamless process. But as you know, and as I do too, the logistics to get a vaccine that has those requirements in the arms of so many people in so many different parts of the country all at once is something that I think is an exercise in logistics that we've never had to really deal with before. But I think as we learn how to synthesize and create vaccines faster and better and testing, it's really kind of proven that we can do things at a higher rate of production than we thought possible. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, Phil, you know, I mean, I speak about the future and what things are happening, what people should do. You know, I indicate that digital transformation is occurring, which means you should be embracing technology if you're able to, because it can make things more efficient. And what's happened is like in healthcare, things that were expected to happen in 10 years are actually all happened in 1 year. The use of robotics in healthcare, telemedicine, precision medicine, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, using cloud platforms for material dispatching, case tracking, mobile technology, even 5G, where it's available. All of that being sort of integrated into solutions for people, because people are you know, home resident, or the fact, like you say, you know, I used to do 250, 300, sometimes 500,000 air miles. And you thought that you had to be on a plane for some meeting, you know, but you know what? Often I find that doing it, you know, using some of the available technologies, these video technologies, is as efficient and often more. I know that I judge contests, like the ITU has this thing called the Innovation Factory, where it's an open platform where startups can compete. And I judge, and I think the experience is actually better online with the pitching sessions and the judging and the bigger audiences they can get than me flying into Geneva and sitting in front of behind a stage or in front of a stage while, you know, the startup founders do their pitches. It's actually much a better experience online, I find. So and then, you know, all of this aspects kind of being brought to our attention. So I guess I'd reinforce what you're saying. It's made us look in a different way, right? And do you think these changes will then be permanent?
I think so. And it's actually changed the way that we're looking now. The Rising Stars Conference has always been a physical conference. Well, I think initially they started out kind of at a hybrid, from a hybrid perspective. But this past year, we basically planned that the Rising Stars Conference happens in January of every year, just preceding CES, and that's intentional so that we can go to CES and see all the cool new toys that are out there, right? And it's in Vegas, obviously, right? So this year, for this year's conference, we started planning it a year ago, which is typical, right? So about mid-year, we're trying to see where COVID was going to take us, where travel was going to take us, where hotels were going to be. And about mid-year, we decided we've got to go, virtual. And so there's just kind of this descending tone, if you will, playing in the back of my, oh, we're going virtual, And I said, guys, think about this. Don't say, oh, we're going virtual. I said, we're going global. All the people that couldn't get here because they couldn't travel, no one could pay their airfare, like you say, having to go to Geneva. Those guys, Stephen can present to us, which you did, by the way, from Vancouver. You didn't have to leave, your home location, right? And so the virtuality of this solved a lot of problems for me because I've been the production guy that you never see at the conferences. I'm the guy that gets there early, sets up the mixer and the microphones and the audio. I'm projector boy, right? Getting the screens and the projectors and the pointers. And by the way, I also did for the conference the video recording. So I'm bringing these little video cameras on tripods with power supplies and SD cards and plugging them in and pointing them in the right direction, making sure there's light, and then going back between each conference and each session and taking the SD cards out and putting them on a big drive and uploading them. And then you get a speaker that says, well, I have the Surface computer. I don't have a PC. Or you get, well, I've got a Mac. I didn't bring a adapter. Well, did you get my slides? I emailed them to you. Well, I don't have your slides, or this mic isn't working, or the battery, or the clips, fill in the blank, right? Not to mention the fact that if you're Mike Andrews and this is your conference and you've got, multiple people speaking at once, you've got to go to this room, go to that room, go to the other room. And by going global/virtual with this, it meant that you're now responsible for your camera, your microphone, your slides. It doesn't matter if you're using a Surface or a tablet or an iPad or a phone or a PC or a Mac or whatever. And it doesn't matter if you're using PowerPoint or notes or whatever the presentation is. And from a video recording perspective, I think we used Zoom. It's all recorded and it's up in the cloud immediately. So my suggestion to our team was, that was great. I said, this next year, even if it's in person, let's use the same technology, the same platform, because this disruption, and you've kind of mentioned this as well, the disruptive nature of these types of things, whether it's you need a vaccine in a few months or a few weeks, or you've got a conference that can't be physical. This disruption, just like the automobile did to the horse and buggy industry. Now you're a blacksmith without a job, well, you go to learn to work in the Ford plant, right? This ability to leverage the disruption with technology made my life, from the production aspect, 10 times simpler. And so my proposal was, this year, even if we're physical, let's use Zoom or whatever teleconferencing technology to put the conference on as well, because that way it doesn't really matter if you're there, if you're here. And again, it saves on cost, saves on time. And by the way, if you're Mike Andrews and you've got 5 speakers that you need to go and visit, and you go in the virtual green room, you zoom into this room, you say hi, you zoom into that room, as you did with you, and you don't have to worry about it. Now, you don't get as many steps in. I think I got 20,000 steps in on the day of the conference in Las Vegas, but it was much more effective, is my point, I guess. And we're learning to leverage technology and embrace the disruption to bring us, just the example of horse and buggy to automobile, from physical conferences to global conferences and being virtual. It's our ability to learn and adapt that I think makes us stronger and makes us more effective.
Yeah, and it really speaks to diversity and inclusion too, right? Because you hold it virtual, people from Africa and Asia and South America, anybody can attend, really. So as long as they're willing to sort of dedicate the time, in essence, right? So rather than having to pay, of course, and all the air travel and so on, a hotel. And Vegas actually at that time of the year gets really hard to get accommodations, right? So
yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah, prices are astronomical for the week after the Rising Stars conference, right? For CES. But you're right. One of the because the Rising Stars Conference is self-funded, right, from donations, and we get the common question of who's going to pay for my travel? Is there a stipend? Do you pay for my lodging? And in some cases we may, but most of the people that are speaking realize the value. And by the way, the Rising Stars Conference is geared towards the younger generation, the graduate, undergraduate students, the young professionals, right? Who are basically going to be governing us and providing technology for us and managing us as we get older and things. So it's really an investment in our future. And by leveraging the global concept of this, you got people in India, people in Canada, people in South Africa, people from all over the globe, and it just expands our ability to give back.
So I got two more questions, and that'll end our chat. The next question is, what should we be looking for in the next 2 to 3 years? And this could be technology or some other opportunity or challenge in the next 2 to 3 years. And then my final question would be just some of your closing comments and where you see yourself personally. So first of all, crystal ball, where do you see the world in 2 to 3 years?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. I don't profess to have a crystal ball. I got lucky in the zombie apocalypse. And again, I was prepared for the polar vortex we had last week. But one of the things I noticed is the progression for us to use technology in things like medicine, telemedicine. As an example, telemedicine has expanded from, there's an old 2.5 Men clip where Charlie Sheen is going to get his medical marijuana prescription, right? And he's at the pharmacy, and the guy spins the computer around, and it's some guy sitting in another country giving him, okay, great. Do you have this? Do you have glaucoma? Great. You have trouble trouble seeing? Great. Here's your prescription, right? Kind of jokingly. But now, and Kent Dix actually spoke about it, the fact that telemedicine is very prevalent, okay? You don't need to travel to the hospital. You don't need to go to the emergency room. You can actually see your physician or a nurse or something over the via Zoom or with your phone even, right? As a matter of fact, and even news reporting, by the way. I was watching the news the other day, and I know you've seen these big news trucks and the cameras and the big transmitters that send information back, and the tripods and the lighting, and the guy sitting there with the microphone. This guy in the news, he had his cell phone. He was like, yeah, well, I'm over here and, blah, blah, blah. It looks like this. I'm thinking, that's where we are on news. That's great. You can do the same thing with, now, here's the disruptive part about this. There was not a charge code in the system. And again, I'm in basically in information management, right? For the most part, there was not a charge code in the system for the doctor to type in, I saw you for an hour and I'm charging you X number of dollars in his system. They had to create these telemedicine charge codes, which was something that became available out of the disruption of the ability to travel. But that old adage, if you want to get sick, go to the hospital. I mean, that's where the germs are, right? So this again helps keep us more well, if that's a term, right? Safer, if you will, by not having to go to the hospital. And look at how things are delivered via Amazon. I mean, you don't even have to go to the store. You can get soap, you can get toothpaste, you can get food, Uber Eats. Who would have thought? I would have never thought that I could get McDonald's or Jack in the Box or Whataburger to deliver. It was pizza. It was the only thing you could get delivered to your house, right? So all of these things. And by the way, travel, you talk about travel. Remember the days of going and getting your car and checking the mileage and getting the fuel and saying, well, I want that. I don't even bother to rent a car half the time when I go somewhere. I take an Uber, or if I fly to DC, and I think I've got another engagement coming up where they said, we're going to be in Crystal City at the Pentagon. I said, great. I've still got a Metro card with some money left on it. I'll just fly to Washington National, Reagan Airport, hop on the Metro, go up to Crystal City, the Pentagon, to the meeting, come back home, and I'll be home. I don't have to rent a car. So this disruption is helping us become more aware of how to be more effective, whether it's with telemedicine or transportation or getting goods and services delivered to us. and being more effective in conferences and having a more wide global reach on things. And it's exciting. That and sensor technology, just exploding. So, I mean, and what to do, what we're going to do with all this data that we get. It's just an exciting time to live and be in our world, Stephen, I think.
Okay, and then this is the final question. And the final question is, where do you see yourself personally? So we talked about what you do professionally and somewhat personally from a professional standpoint. but where do you see yourself personally in, let's say, 10 years? And then I'll ask you the final question, just your closing comments. So first of all, where do you see yourself in 10 years?
I see myself more engaged with coming up with solutions to problems that we haven't even heard of yet, right? We haven't even seen yet. I foresee myself being involved, and I may not be the smartest person in the room. I may not know all the answers, but I see myself being able to do what I love doing, what I'm really good at doing, which is being given a situation and being asked to come up with a solution and have some resources, but not all of the resources. And I don't know what that's necessarily going to be, but people say, well, gee, what about retirement? For me, retirement isn't sitting on a beach or on a boat with a, glass of wine or with a fishing pole. To me, retirement is being able to give more than I'm currently giving today and not being concerned with the financial aspects or the return on investment. Basically, the return on investment to me is in our future and the quality of life that we'll have going forward. So that's kind of where I see myself is being a part of the solution to problems we haven't even seen yet, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, there is this term outside of return on an investment, which is more of a financial aspect, to return on value, which is much broader. So, and that value could be a better world than it often is, right? So, are all of the stakeholders, all of the people who have some kind of partaking in or participation in some kind of project or endeavor, will they win as well? So is it a shared win, or some of my colleagues would say it's an omni win? Everybody benefits. So it's a return on value, not just a financial return. And then let's now get to your final sort of words of wisdom or other words you want to leave to the audience.
Well, I would close with this, Stephen. And I typically go through a SWOT diagram, a personal SWOT diagram at the beginning of the year. And one of the things that's always listed on there is our propensity, mine included, to want to be at rest, right? I mean, it's important to be able to rest and renew, whether it's spiritual energy, physical energy, emotional energy, or the types of expenditures that we have. But it's important not to find yourself stagnant and stay there, right? It's important to embrace change. And as you said, this stretching, I mean, I say stress, people call it stress, but let's call it a challenge, right? It's important to have new challenges. If you have no challenges, you're not growing. And if you're not growing, you're not contributing to society as a whole or to the quality of life. And it's important to know, I think for me, to know what I'm good at, what my limitations are, things that I'd like to do better, and things that I have no desire to continue to do better or be better at, and choose to embrace those and continue to grow, if that makes any sense. Mike, my mentor, challenged me when before I was able to get you on camera for your interview for the Rising Stars. Here was a challenge Mike gave me. We looked at the agenda, and Mike, I guess, considers me as overall production manager, but I'm just one of the hired hands, right? And again, with my production experience in other conferences, either curating content or coming up with a schedule or doing behind the scenes video or whatever you have, Mike said, hey, we've got these great speakers. I mean, we've got Stephen Ibaraki, we've got Vince Cerf, we've got William Hurley, quantum computing. And he said, we've got these 15-minute gaps. He says, you're going to fill them. Now, normally I'd say, okay, great, that's fine. It's January, it's February, the conference is in 8 months, 10 months, not a problem. I can handle this, right? This was, I think, 10 days before the conference was supposed to start. And I thought to myself, how am I going to fill that? Is it going to be, and so, by the way, what I was faced with before we had gone to our team and said, we would like an individual host / handler for each of our speakers to be dedicated to that person. If you're Stephen's handler, make sure you communicate with Stephen, get his bio, get his photo, get his slides. When, get on the Zoom call 30 minutes, 40 minutes before the call, make sure he's comfortable, make sure his camera works, make sure his microphone works, make sure his background looks good, and be with him, for that entire session. That's something we had not done before. So when Mike said, we've got all these great speakers, who wants to be their host? And there was silence. I said, guys, this is an opportunity. I know you've not done this before. Anyone can pay to go to a conference, but you can't pay to be Stephen Ibaraki's host, Vince Cerf's host, William Hurley's host, John Butler's host, and have that connection. It's one thing to go on LinkedIn and say, yeah, I saw your session, but it's another thing to say, hey, remember when we did that session, I was your host? I'd like to connect with you. And so Mike said to me, who do you want to host? I said, Mike, I want them all, but it's not about me. It's about, the team, the younger generation, the students, basically young professionals, to get out there, make those connections. I said, I've got a lot of connections. I'd love to have more, but it's not about me. I give the opportunity to the team to go and get that. And I told them, I said, this is a get to, not a got to. And I explained it. And so some of them came up, and pretty soon, all the speakers had a host. Then Mike says, oh, by the way, you're going to fill in that 50 minutes, those 50 minutes. I had, I think, what I tell you, 12, 15-minute slots. And I'm thinking, he says, oh, interview some of the team. I said, that's great. But I said, what an opportunity for the speakers to push their topic either before or after their session. And I said, plus, now I get to make the connection with all these speakers that respond to me. And I didn't push them. If you didn't respond, I wasn't going to push you. But people like you that jumped on and said, yes, I want to be there. I leveraged that opportunity and look at the connections I've made. And it's been just great. It's given me a much broader view of the things that are possible and the opportunities that present themselves to me personally. And it wasn't something that I did to get, I did to give. And instead it came back to me tenfold. So I guess my parting words would be, don't be afraid of change. Don't be afraid to embrace challenges, because that's the only way that you grow. If you don't have a challenge, you're not going to grow, and you don't want to be stagnant, because if you're stagnant, everyone else is moving ahead and you're basically falling behind.
Hey, Phil, those are really wonderful contributions and recommendations to the audience. And you shared so much of your very detailed background, where you've done a lot, and you've been able to be a sponsor of change, positive change. You've been a catalyst for transformation globally in so many different communities. Had a wonderful day today with you. Thank you so much for sharing so much with our audience.
Stephen, thank you so much. What a wonderful opportunity. I can't thank you enough.